A determined single father embarks on a humble task, mending an aged barn nestled within a serene farm setting. He believes it's merely another paycheck. Unbeknownst to him, the woman who brought him on board possesses vast expanses of land and a history that has the potential to alter the course of their lives indefinitely. The barn teetered on the brink of collapse. Raindrops trickled through the fractured ceiling. Silas brushed the perspiration from his forehead, clutching the aged grip of his hammer. Marigold, serene, enigmatic. You tend to resolve matters without seeking clarification. Do you not, Mr. Calloway? Silas smirks and responds, I don't ask questions when I need the money. Perhaps he ought to have. Silas Calloway inhaled deeply, allowing the cool autumn air to fill his lungs as he exited the weathered pickup truck. The modest dwelling he had leased on the outskirts of Hopewell may not have been grand, yet it served as a fresh beginning, a space where he and his son, Finn, could attempt to create something akin to a home. Finn, a sprightly 7-year-old brimming with energy, leaped from the truck bed, his sneakers making a satisfying crunch on the gravel driveway. His wide, inquisitive eyes explored their surroundings before shifting to his father with an eager smile. Dad, do you believe there might be hidden treasure in this place? He inquired, springing on his toes. Silas laughed softly, playfully tousling his son's unruly blonde locks. Perhaps it's not treasure, but I sense we'll uncover something worthwhile in this town. They had reached Hopewell just the previous night, and even though Silas had only started to unpack, tasks were already awaiting him. A job offer arrived from a woman named Marigold Everhart, who owned an old farm on the outskirts of town. She sought a craftsman to restore the aging barn on her land, and Silas, a talented carpenter, had readily agreed to take on the task. Labor was labor, and for a man who had wandered through a series of peculiar positions over the past few years, it was precisely what he required. As Silas navigated the twisting country road toward the Everhart farm, he found himself captivated by the picturesque landscape. Vast expanses of golden wheat unfolded towards the horizon, dancing softly in the refreshing breeze. The trees that bordered the road were set aglow with the vibrant hues of autumn, transforming the scenery into a canvas of brilliant reds and oranges. Hopewell seemed distinct from the locations he had traversed previously. It possessed a certain calmness, a tranquility that resonated profoundly within the very essence of being. As the Everhart farm emerged on the horizon, Silas eased off the accelerator, absorbing the vast expanse of the land before him. The farmhouse stood as a delightful reminder of a bygone era, featuring white wooden panels and a welcoming wraparound porch. A short distance away loomed the barn he had been contracted to fix. The red paint had lost its vibrancy, and the roof dipped in certain areas, yet the framework remained solid and promising. A woman stood by the barn, clad in a flannel shirt, jeans, and robust work boots. She stood with her arms crossed, examining the barn with a focused gaze. As Silas emerged from the truck, the woman shifted her gaze in his direction. Her long chestnut brown hair was gathered into a loose ponytail, framing a face that was captivating, not in a flashy manner, but in a way that invited your gaze to linger. Her eyes held a quiet strength, brimming with untold stories. Silas Calloway, she inquired, her tone calm and unwavering. He nodded, reaching out with a weathered hand. That's who I am. It seems you are Marigold Everhart. She grasped his hand with determination. Thank you for arriving so promptly. The barn has certainly experienced its share of wear and tear, yet I hope to preserve its presence for a little while longer, if I can. Silas cast a quick look at the structure. It shouldn't pose any issues. Would it be all right if I examined this more closely? With a subtle wave, Marigold invited him to enter, and he complied, crossing the threshold. The aroma of seasoned timber and dried grass permeated the atmosphere while shafts of sunlight poured through the openings in the ceiling. He glided his fingers over one of the support beams, tapping it gently. Sturdy, positive indication. The structure remains robust, he remarked, glancing at her. However, the roof requires reinforcement, and several of these boards ought to be replaced prior to winter. Settles in. Marigold nodded, her expression contemplative. I'm here to assist in any way possible. I'm not particularly skilled in woodworking, but I can manage to grip a hammer. Silas wore a sly grin. Few landowners I've encountered are inclined to engage in the hard work themselves. I prefer not to just stand around, she said plainly. That was something Silas could admire. While the repair plans were being discussed, Finn roamed the property, playfully kicking at the fallen leaves with a childlike enthusiasm. Close to the farmhouse, he noticed a tiny, unkempt dog nestled beneath the porch steps. "Father, observe," Ven shouted. He knelt low, reaching out slowly with a tentative hand toward the dog. The creature approached cautiously, its nose twitching as it took in his scent. And then, with a joyful flick of its tail, it signaled its acceptance. Marigold let out a soft laugh. "That is Rusty. One day he arrived and made the choice to remain. I believe he is not meant to be owned by anyone. May I hold on to him?" Finn inquired, his eyes gleaming with anticipation. Silas paused, uncertainty flickering in his eyes. They were in the midst of getting comfortable, and bringing a pet into their lives was a significant commitment. Yet, the way Finn held onto the small dog, the way Rusty nestled against him as if they were old friends, Silas found himself unable to refuse. Marigold beamed. "Rusty has been on the hunt for companionship. It seems he has just discovered one." Silas looked at her, perceiving a silent message in her gaze, a subtle connection between them. As the sun sank lower in the sky, enveloping the farm in a warm golden hue, Silas realized he was staying longer than he had planned. Something about this place captured his attention. The way Marigold spoke of it with such passion, and how Finn had effortlessly settled in, causing him to stop and reflect. For years, he had been on the move, seeking a place where he and Finn could finally find their home. Perhaps Hopewell was indeed that place. Perhaps this farm, with its aged barn and its steadfast owner, marked the beginning of a new chapter. Marigold, glancing at him from the periphery of her vision, experienced a matching uncertainty. For what felt like an eternity, she had embraced solitude, accustomed to maintaining distance from others. Yet, Silas and Finn brought with them an undeniable warmth, a sensation she had long forgotten. As Silas loaded Finn into the truck, Marigold felt words spilling from her lips before she could rein them in. "I bake an exceptional apple pie," she declared. "If you happen to be free this weekend, perhaps you and Finn could come over for a visit." Silas locked eyes with her, a gradual smile unfolding on his lips. "We would appreciate that." As he drove away, Marigold observed the dust settling behind his truck, an unusual sensation blossoming in her chest. Perhaps, just perhaps, something had started to blossom. The steady beat of a hammer hitting would resonated through the serene morning atmosphere as Silas Calloway concentrated on his craft. The barn, though weathered and worn, was slowly coming back to life as he fastened a new wooden plank to one of the support beams, witnessing the revival of its sturdy form. The sun had just begun to peek over the treetops, yet he was already at work. After years of honing his craft, he had learned that the early hours were the most productive for his work. The air was crisp, the surroundings serene, and he found solace in the unwavering, deliberate cadence of his art. In the distance, the unmistakable crunch of boots on gravel heralded the arrival of Marigold Everhart. She fulfilled her promise to assist, yet he remained astonished by her insistence. In his previous experiences, the majority of landowners chose to oversee operations from afar, providing only sporadic feedback regarding his advancements. However, Marigold was different. "Would you like some coffee?" She approached him, extending a worn thermos with a sense of purpose. Silas paused in his work, placing the hammer aside as he graciously accepted the cup she offered him. The deep scent of black coffee wafted softly around them. He savored the sip, a nod of satisfaction following. "Powerful." Marigold wore a sly grin. "I don't do weak coffee." Silas cast a glance her way, observing how her keen green eyes swept over the barn, revealing a blend of critical observation and affection. She was observing more than just the framework. She found herself lost in a memory. Text, This location surely holds significant value for you, he commented. She paused briefly before responding. This heirloom has been passed down through my family for generations. This was crafted by my grandfather, created with his own hands. My parents maintained its operation. My childhood was filled with adventures in these fields, where I learned to ride horses long before I ever pedaled a bike. Her voice mellowed, laced with an undercurrent of depth. However, she remarked, things have changed. It's only me. Silas refrained from pressing further. He grasped the essence of loss. He had carried it with him for years. He savored another sip of coffee before making his way back. His attention turned to the barn. Fortunately, this place still possesses solid foundations. With some effort, it will endure for many years ahead. She offered him a subtle, grateful nod. That is the aspiration. For the next few hours, they toiled together, each focused on their task. Silas took on the bulk of the strenuous tasks, while Marigold contributed by holding beams steady, measuring planks, and passing tools as needed. His tools. Though she lacked his experience, her eagerness to learn made a significant difference. Finding someone who is truly dedicated to putting in the effort for something they are passionate about is a rarity. By mid-morning, Finn made his entrance, with Rusty joyfully following at his heels. The boy was adamant about bringing the dog to the farm, proclaiming that Rusty had officially become his business partner. Are you interested in collaborating on a business venture? Marigold inquired, a hint of amusement in her voice. Finn nodded with a grave expression. Indeed, my father handles repairs while I ensure everyone stays on task. Silas let out a soft chuckle. I suppose I should remain alert then. Finn's presence infused the atmosphere with a sense of buoyancy. He ventured into the barn with an infectious curiosity, probing endlessly about the tools, the wood, and the very essence of the structure. Will this barn look brand new once you're finished? Finn inquired, tilting his head as he scrutinized. The wall only partially mended. Silas pondered the inquiry. Not unfamiliar, yet resilient. Some elements are not intended for replacement, but rather for strengthening. Marigold looked at him then, a spark of comprehension flickering in her eyes, as if she grasped the significance of his words. As they toiled, Silas observed how Marigold deftly sidestepped discussing her family in any depth. The subtle tightening of her jaw whenever she discussed the farms was telling. What about history? Hopewell was a quaint little town. Whispers spread quickly. He had already gathered fragments of the narrative from informal chats at the diner. The Everhart family was once among the most affluent landowners in the region. Marigold's father had transformed the business, making astute investments that elevated a humble farm into something magnificent. However, following his passing, everything had shifted. The estate was bequeathed to Marigold. Yet, she felt no allure towards the riches, the power, or the pressures associated with the Everhart legacy. She firmly dismissed the notion of selling the land to developers, standing her ground against the relentless pressure from corporate buyers. Instead, she had embraced this life, a serene existence, nurturing the land, managing the farm according to her own vision. Silas held that in high regard. Turning your back on the world's expectations was no simple feat. As the afternoon progressed, ominous clouds began to loom on the horizon. The wind surged, whisking leaves into a lively dance across the earth. Marigold gazed up at the sky. It appears a storm is on the horizon. Silas acknowledged with a nod. It's time to conclude our work for today. This old barn won't withstand high winds, Finn groaned. Ah, but we were merely beginning, Marigold beamed. The barn will remain standing for you tomorrow, Finn. With a hint of hesitation, the boy collected his belongings as Silas meticulously organized their efforts for the evening. As they prepared to depart, the initial drops of rain started to descend from the sky. As Silas pivoted to face his truck, Marigold lingered, caught in a moment of uncertainty. Then, in a voice that barely rose above the howling wind, she suggested, you and Finn should come by for dinner sometime. It had been some time since this house welcomed visitors, and Silas locked eyes with her. Her words carried a refreshing sincerity that was unmistakable. Nothing artificial, nothing stiff. Merely a straightforward invitation. Indeed, he remarked. Marigold nodded once, a glimmer of agreement in her eyes, before she turned her gaze toward the farmhouse. Silas observed her departure, a feeling awakening within him that eluded definition. The storm approached, and while he navigated the road with Finn babbling away in the seat next to him, an unsettling sensation lingered in his mind. That in spite of the clouds, in spite of the uncertainty, there was something about Hopewell that resonated as a bit more like home. The rain continued its relentless fall throughout the night. As dawn broke, Hopewell found itself shrouded in a delicate, silvery mist, the roads glistening with moisture, and the atmosphere thick with the rich aroma of wet soil. Silas Calloway observed the droplets competing on the misty window of his modest rented home, savoring the final sips of his coffee while Finn animatedly conversed at the kitchen table. "Do you believe Rusty has a fondness for pancakes?" the boy inquired, his legs swinging playfully beneath the chair. Silas raised an eyebrow. Finn grinned, confident that Rusty would enjoy whatever he could find, and let a small piece of his pancake fall to the floor. In an instant, Rusty sprang ahead, seizing the treat with a joyful wag of his tail. Silas let out a heavy sigh, yet he couldn't bring himself to scold his son. Since their arrival in Hopewell, Finn had felt a newfound lightness, a sense of ease enveloping him. Perhaps it was the sense of stability, or perhaps it was the subtle enchantment of Everhart Farm that had already started to intertwine with their lives, and perhaps it was something or someone entirely different. Silas let out a slow breath, setting that thought aside. This evening, he and Finn found themselves dining at the Everhart farmhouse, courtesy of Marigold's kind invitation. The idea of gathering around a well-set dinner table, enjoying a meal that was thoughtfully prepared rather than thrown together from random fridge contents, stirred an unexpected feeling within him. It had been ages since he had experienced the comfort of a place that truly felt like home. Just a brief pause in his journey, Finn crammed another piece of pancake into his mouth before tilting his head. "Do you believe Miss Marigold enjoys pancakes?" Silas wore a sly grin. "I envision that she does. What is the reason behind this?" Finn scrunched his nose, remarking on her rather serious demeanor. Silas chuckled, pondering if perhaps she only indulged in sophisticated, adult cuisine. "I'll definitely bring it up during dinner." When Silas and Finn reached Everhart Farm that evening, the storm had already moved on, leaving the fields vibrant and shimmering under the waning light. The farmhouse, despite its age, exuded a serene elegance, with its porch light illuminating a gentle warmth against the encroaching twilight of the sky. Marigold welcomed them at the entrance, her sleeves pushed up, a smudge of flour adorning her cheek. She appeared transformed, perhaps more gentle, less defensive. She remarked, "The timing couldn't be better. The meal is nearly prepared." Finn radiated joy. "Have you prepared pancakes?" Marigold blinked, then let out a soft chuckle. "Not quite, but nearly there." Within the farmhouse, a unique universe unfolded, warm and inviting, infused with the aroma of freshly baked bread and a hint of something simmering gently. The walls adorned with vintage photographs, books piled carelessly on the shelves, and a fire softly crackling in the stone hearth created an inviting atmosphere. It resonated with a sense of belonging. As they made themselves comfortable, Marigold presented steaming bowls of beef stew and freshly baked biscuits, placing them on the robust wooden dining table. Finn savored a bite and instantly let out a satisfied hum. "Understood. This is much improved, and pancakes," Marigold beamed, pleased to hear it. Silas surveyed his surroundings, absorbing the nuances of the space. "This location carries a rich past," Marigold acknowledged, her demeanor contemplative. "Each nook and cranny holds a tale waiting to be uncovered." Finn, with his insatiable curiosity, gestured towards an aged black and white photograph resting on the mantel. "Who is that?" Marigold turned her attention to where he was looking, her expression subtly changing. "That is my father, Elijah Everhart." Silas observed how her fingers gently wrapped around the table's edge, and how her voice lowered just enough to hint at something left unsaid. She continued, saying he had developed this farm from the ground up, transformed it into its current form. He harbored grand aspirations, whether for himself or for me. Those final words carried a heaviness, an air of incompleteness. Silas refrained from pushing further. He grasped that particular silence, one that contained memories so intertwined they were difficult to untangle. Yet Finn, free from the constraints of adult conventions, posed the question with candor. Is he still around? Marigold paused for a moment, then resolutely shook her head. No, he has been gone for a few years now. Oh, Finn murmured gently, I apologize. Marigold offered a subtle smile. Thanks, Finn. Silas observed her intently, noting the brief glimmer of sorrow that danced in her gaze. He recognized that sensation, that emptiness where a person ought to be, and for the first time, he contemplated the extent of Marigold Everhart's losses. After dinner, as Finn played outside with Rusty, Silas stood on the farmhouse porch next to Marigold, both of them observing the sky darken, with stars starting to emerge. Silas expressed his gratitude for the invitation. It feels like ages since we enjoyed a genuine home-cooked meal. Marigold rested against the wooden railing, her eyes lost in thought. I thought it was the right moment for this house to welcome some company once more. A moment lingered in the air, not awkward but rich with significance. She observed after a pause, You rarely mention your past. Silas let out a breath. There's not a lot to discuss. She shifted her position, observing him intently. That is not accurate. He chuckled softly, a knowing smile playing on his lips as he shook his head. Perhaps not. Yet another moment of stillness. Then, as if she understood the weight of her next words, she inquired, What happened to Finn's mother? Silas's hold on the railing grew firmer. It wasn't that he was unwilling to discuss it. Discussing it never seemed to alter the outcome. She has departed, he finally stated. A collision involving a vehicle. Finn had just turned 3. Marigold's expression softened, conveying understanding without a trace of pity. I apologize. Silas gave a slight nod, feeling a constriction in his throat. She remarked that you had done well with him. He's an exceptional young man. A subtle, authentic smile graced Silas's lips. Indeed, he is. They lingered in silence, the night enveloping them, an unvoiced connection hanging in the air. At last, Marigold cast her gaze upon him, her expression subtly transforming in a way that was nearly undetectable. Something serene, seeking something. At times, she murmured gently, events unfold differently than we envisioned. Yet that doesn't imply they can't still hold value. Silas locked eyes with her, and for the first time in ages, he entertained the notion that she could be correct. The past lingered, an ever-present shadow trailing in their wake. Yet, perhaps, there lay something ahead that beckoned to be pursued, and perhaps, just perhaps, Hopewell wasn't merely another waypoint along the journey, but rather something of greater significance. The sun dipped low in the sky above the Everhart farm, bathing the fields in a warm, golden glow as Silas Calloway maneuvered his truck along the well-known gravel road. Finn settled beside him in the passenger seat, his tiny hands clutching Rusty's fur while the dog rested, happily, on his lap. Since that dinner at the farmhouse, an undeniable change had taken place. It was nothing explicit. Marigold remained the composed, subtly resolute individual she had been when they first crossed paths. Yet a warmth lingered now, subtle yet unmistakable, akin to the initial whisper of spring following a prolonged winter. Silas had dedicated the last few days to the barn, steadily advancing and finding his groove in the consistent flow of hard work. Years had passed since he last experienced the fulfillment of witnessing something shattered gradually regain its vigor under his touch. Today, Marigold extended an invitation to him and Finn to linger through the afternoon, not only to enjoy a meal together but also to engage in the act of planting something meaningful. Have you ever planted anything before, kid? Silas inquired as he eased the truck to a stop by the barn. Finn shook his head in disbelief. No. However, Miss Marigold insists that it's quite simple. Simply excavate, place the seed within, and then conceal it. Silas let out a soft laugh. That's the essence of it. However, it requires time and patience. Immediate results are not visible. Finn inclined his head thoughtfully. Is it similar to repairing the barn? Silas cast a look in his direction, the boy's straightforward remark resonating profoundly within him. Absolutely, it's akin to mending the barn. Marigold stood by the garden behind the farmhouse, gloves tucked under one arm and a small wooden crate filled with seed packets beside her, ready for their arrival. She embodied the essence of someone who had toiled on the land her entire life. Throughout her life, her hair was often gathered into a relaxed braid, with dirt already marking the knees of her jeans. I trust you both are prepared to dive in, she said, passing Finn a small trowel. Finn smiled broadly. I'm absolutely prepared, Silas grinned. We'll see about that, Marigold said, pointing to a line of freshly turned earth. We are sowing wildflowers. This area has remained barren for far too long. She knelt beside Finn, demonstrating the art of creating delicate indentations in the soil before gently placing the seeds within. Silas observed his son as he mirrored her actions, his typical exuberance briefly subdued by a serene concentration. It felt almost enchanting. Finn reflected as he covered it with soil. The seeds, invisible to the eye yet flourishing, Marigold smiled. The most remarkable aspect is that you must have faith in what remains unseen for now. Silas knelt next to them, pushing his sleeves up. It seems like you've been at this since your childhood, haven't you? Marigold nodded, gently tucking a stray lock of hair behind her ear. My mother cherished gardening. She believed it was akin to sowing hope. Silas stole a look at her, noticing the brief flicker of emotion that passed over her face. He recognized that particular shadow, the one that remained long after the years had slipped away. He inquired gently. Marigold gave a slight nod. At 17, it was stripped down, devoid of embellishments, merely the heavy silence of loss. Silas refrained from empty words, merely nodding, fully aware of how grief molded an individual, how it embedded itself deeply within. For a time they toiled in quietude, the kind that flowed effortlessly, as if there was a mutual understanding that certain things were best left unspoken. They were almost done with the planting when the sound of a car crunching over the gravel driveway caused them to stop. Marigold tensed, her demeanor transforming from at ease to alert in a heartbeat. Silas tracked her gaze as a polished black sedan glided to a stop in front of the house. A sharply attired gentleman emerged, his gleaming footwear strikingly at odds with the rugged landscape around him. Marigold brushed her hands against her jeans and rose to her feet. Stay here, she whispered to Silas, then confidently walked toward the house. Silas shared a knowing look with a Finn, conveying a wordless message to remain silent. The visitor's presence carried an unsettling quality, too pristine, too deliberate. From a slight distance, he couldn't grasp the entirety of the conversation, but he picked up enough snippets. Marigold, you've been overlooking. The man spoke, his voice smooth and rehearsed. I believed there was nothing more to express, Marigold responded, her tone composed. The man let out a sharp breath. Let's go. This farm is truly a treasure waiting to be uncovered. It's time to release it. Silas sensed a tension in his jaw. He was unaware of the complete narrative, yet he felt uneasy about the way the man addressed her, as if he possessed a right to something that belonged to another. Marigold folded her arms. This discussion has already taken place. My response remains the same. The man let out a derisive laugh, shaking his head in disbelief. You're being quite obstinate. This isn't in line with what your father would have envisioned. Marigold's expression grew steely. You have no right to speak on behalf of my father. Silas had reached his limit. He stood up, dusting off his hands, and made his way over. Is everything all right? Marigold cast a sidelong look at him, a spark of something dancing in her eyes, perhaps a sense of appreciation. The man observed, Silas unmistakably noting the frayed flannel, the roughened hands, the dust accumulated from the garden. His lips curved subtly, hinting at a touch of amusement. Who might you be? Silas remained unfazed by the provocation. He maintained the man's gaze, unwavering and resolute. a figure who clearly disdains witnessing others being mistreated. The man let out a breath through his nose before turning back to Marigold. Consider it carefully, he urged, before the moment slips away. He slipped back into his car and drove away, a hush settling behind him. Marigold exhaled deeply, her fingers curling tightly. By her sides, Silas held back his question for the moment. He paused for a moment before saying, "That kind of thing happens often." She let out a breath. "Exceeding my preference." Silas gave a slight nod. "Yet you continue to refuse." Her eyes locked onto his, steadfast and resolute. Each and every time. He observed her intently for a brief moment, then gave a nod of understanding. "Excellent." A subtle smile played at the edges of her lips. She cast a quick look at the freshly planted garden, wiping the soil from her hands. "These need some watering." As the sun dipped lower in the sky, Silas allowed the dialogue to flow in a different direction, aware that she would share more when the time felt right for her. He seized a watering can, passing one to Finn, as Marigold picked up another. As they lingered in the waning light, nurturing seeds that had yet to sprout, Silas sensed that something else, equally hidden, was starting to establish itself as well. The expansive sky above Hopewell glowed with a golden hue as Silas Calloway fastened the final wooden beam into position. The barn was beginning to regain its former completeness. The missing shingles were replaced, the sagging roof reinforced, and with each stroke of his hammer, it felt as though he was piecing together not just the barn, but also something deep within himself. Marigold Everhart lingered a short distance away, observing his efforts with a gaze that was simultaneously contemplative and enigmatic. A few days had passed since the enigmatic figure in a suit had arrived at her farmhouse, and while she had kept her thoughts largely to herself, Silas could sense the burden it placed upon her. She possessed remarkable strength. It was evident, unyielding as well. Yet, even the most resilient individuals bore their imperfections, and Silas sensed that Marigold's imperfections were profound. "Not too shabby," she finally remarked, gesturing toward the barn. "It seems to fit in perfectly once more." Silas grinned, using the back of his hand to wipe the sweat from his brow. "That's the objective." With her arms crossed, she subtly adjusted her stance. "You've done excellent work." He observed her intently for a moment. "You say that as if it's unexpected." Marigold let out a soft chuckle. "I suppose I am, to some extent. Many individuals tend to abandon their pursuits before reaching completion." Silas maintained his gaze. "I stand apart from the crowd." A glimmer danced in her eyes, a fleeting moment she swiftly concealed as she pivoted toward the house. "I made lemonade," she called back. "Thought you and Finn might like some." Silas observed her departure, feeling that the barriers she had constructed around her heart had just risen a notch higher. Later that afternoon, as Finn frolicked in the front yard with Rusty, Silas reclined against the porch railing, a chilled glass of lemonade in his grasp. Marigold observed from her spot, her gaze fixed on Finn as he playfully pursued the dog across the verdant expanse. She noted his contentment in this place. Silas nodded, observing the joy on his son's face as Rusty zipped playfully between his legs. "Indeed he is." Marigold paused, then remarked, "You don't share much about your reasons for coming to Hopewell." Silas gazed into his glass for a moment, contemplating his response. "There's not a lot to share, just felt the urge for a new beginning." Marigold raised an eyebrow. "New beginnings require a departure from the past." He breathed out deliberately. "When Finn was just 3 years old, he lost his mother. After that, I devoted considerable time to escaping the sorrow. I believed that as long as I kept moving, it would never catch up to me." She paused for a moment, then gently asked, "Did it?" Silas emitted a brief, mirthless laugh. "Indeed, it appears that sorrow is indifferent to the speed at which one tries to escape it." Marigold stirred her lemonade, observing the ice dance within the glass. "I understand that sensation." He cast a fleeting look in her direction. "Is that your father?" She gave a slight nod. "And my mother prior to him." Silas had an inkling of that truth. "They constructed this place from the very foundation." She went on, her tone unwavering yet remote. My father was resolute. He aspired to transform this farm into something grander than merely a piece of earth. He envisioned growth, new ventures, and opportunities. But after his departure, individuals began to converge, eager to acquire it, ready to reshape it into something entirely different. Silas. He contemplated the figure clad in formal attire. Similar to your guest from the other day, Marigold's jaw clenched. Damon Caldwell. He was once considered a family friend, or at least that's what I believed. Silas scowled. She let out a dry laugh, remarking that he hardly appears to be a true friend now. Absolutely not. There was an unspoken truth lingering in the air, a secret she held close to her heart. Yet Silas understood the importance of restraint. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Silas gathered his tools, and a truck rumbled into the driveway. It lacked the elegance of Caldwell's car. This one was aged, covered in dust, the type that had endured countless seasons of toil on the farm. A figure emerged, his sturdy build recognizable, even before he fully entered the illumination. Marigold. The man greeted, his voice rough yet warm. Marigold folded her arms across her chest. What is it that you seek, Henry? Henry Logan. Silas had caught whispers of the name drifting through conversations in town. He was among the prominent landowners in the region, a figure with long-standing ties to Hopewell. Henry cast a fleeting look at Silas, then shifted his focus back to Marigold. It seems Caldwell has been poking around once more. Marigold let out a quick breath. So? Henry gave a slight shrug. Conversations are buzzing. Some believe it's wise to sell now before the decision is taken out of your hands. Silas found the sound unappealing. Are you implying something menacing? He inquired, moving closer. Henry raised a hand. Caldwell has a unique talent for crafting things. Proceed in his direction. If he truly desires this land, he will undoubtedly discover a means to acquire it. Marigold's demeanor remained steadfast. I'm not in the business of selling, Henry. Henry observed her intently for a prolonged moment, then let out a deep sigh. Unyielding as always, he pivoted back to face his truck. Just exercise caution, Marigold. Not every battle is worth engaging in. Marigold remained silent. Henry sped away, a cloud of dust swirling behind him. Silas let out a breath, his fingers combing through his hair. That certainly had an air of foreboding. Marigold paused before replying. Then, in a soft whisper, she declared, "This land is my family's legacy. I refuse to allow them to seize it." Silas maintained his focus on her eyes. "In that case, you won't have to face the battle by yourself." She blinked, as though the idea had never crossed her mind. "What makes it matter to you?" He gave a nonchalant shrug. "Having experienced the pain of losing something significant, I understand the depth of that feeling." A lengthy pause lingered in the air between them. Then, with a deliberate motion, Marigold inclined her head. For the first time, Silas noticed a subtle change in her, a faint fissure in her armor. Perhaps, just perhaps, she was beginning to realize that she didn't have to face this journey by herself. The waning afternoon sun sprawled over the Everhart farm, drenching the fields in a warm, golden glow. The barn repairs approached their conclusion, and the land appeared to resonate with a subtle assurance of endurance. Yet, in spite of the evening's warm glow, an unspoken heaviness lingered, akin to the distant rumble of thunder on the horizon. Silas Calloway had sensed it ever since Henry Logan's arrival. A caution lingered in the older man's voice, a stark reminder that individuals such as Damon Caldwell were not accustomed to accepting refusal. The deeper he delved into it, the more it stirred a sense of unease within him. Marigold, in her usual manner, had scarcely brought it up. She continued as though nothing was amiss, immersing herself in her tasks, nurturing the land as if her unwavering determination could protect it. Silas identified the protective strategy. For years, he had engaged in the same routine, yet ignoring the issue didn't make it vanish. As the evening air turned crisp, Silas discovered Marigold by the barn, carefully arranging sacks of feed onto a sturdy wooden pallet. She toiled with a subtle resolve that hinted at her desire to escape the confines of her own mind. "If you keep going at that pace, you'll end up running yourself into the ground," he remarked, propped against the barn wall. Marigold continued without hesitation. Rather than idly waiting for issues to approach him, Silas observed her from a distance. He paused for a moment, then folded his arms. "This is something you must pay attention to, Marigold." She let out a quick breath, brushing her hands against her jeans. "I'm not overlooking it. Seems as though you are." Her eyes locked onto his, a spark of irritation glimmering in her emerald gaze. "What precisely do you need from me, Silas? Submit? I'm not in the business of selling, and there's no way I'm allowing Damon Caldwell to intimidate me off my own property." Silas held her gaze, resolute. "While it's not a requirement, having a plan is essential. Individuals like Caldwell don't simply vanish at your command." Marigold sealed her lips, holding back the sharp response that lingered just at the edge of her tongue. At last she exhaled gently. "I understand." Silas moved in closer. "Allow me to assist you." Marigold paused, as though the notion of accepting assistance was entirely unfamiliar to her. Silas mellowed his voice. "I understand the experience of feeling as though you must tackle everything by yourself. However, that is not the case." Her eyes lingered on his for a brief moment before she gave a subtle nod, slight yet significant. Before either of them could utter another word, the wind surged, stirring the fields with an abrupt, restless vigor. Above, ominous clouds started to gather, engulfing the final traces of azure sky. Marigold furrowed her brow, casting her gaze upward. "That wasn't predicted." Silas squinted at the distant skyline. "It might be insignificant, or it might signal a problem." As soon as the words escaped his lips, a sudden blast of wind propelled an aged metal bucket to dance across the barn floor. Finn and Rusty, having been engaged in play by the farmhouse, dashed over with excitement. "Father, gaze upon the heavens." Finn gestured toward the gathering storm clouds. "It is progressing rapidly." Silas sensed it deep within him. This was no ordinary storm. Marigold was in motion. "We must ensure the animals are safely secured before the worst arrives." They leaped into motion, guiding the animals into the refuge of the stables while the wind roared through the branches. The initial droplets of rain started to descend, plump and weighty upon the parched ground. A distant flash of lightning illuminated the horizon. Silas led Finn in the direction of the house. "Remain indoors with Rusty, understood?" Finn appeared hesitant, yet he nodded and sprinted toward the farmhouse, the dog trailing closely behind him. As Silas pivoted back toward the barn, the storm had completely descended upon the landscape. Sheets of rain battered the earth, the wind howling with a ferocity that seemed intent on tearing apart everything in its way. And then he caught sight of it, the north fence, already worn and frail, bending perilously beneath the storm's relentless assault. "Marigold," he called out. "The breeze. The fence is set to be removed." She pivoted at the perfect moment to witness it give way, the wooden posts breaking apart like fragile twigs. In a moment of pure instinct, she dashed toward it. Silas muttered a string of curses and dashed after her. Marigold was the first to arrive at the broken fence, seizing a loose section before the wind had a chance to whisk it away. Yet the storm's fury was unyielding, the rain obscuring all vision. Silas extended his hand towards her arm. "Marigold, release it. It isn't worth pursuing." Hurt by herself, she shook her head, her grip growing firmer. If the cattle get loose, a tree in the distance was struck by lightning, the thunder's crack so loud it shook the ground beneath them. Silas acted without a moment's pause. He encircled her waist with his arm, drawing her close, just as another fierce gust of wind hurled debris into the air. They made their way back to the barn, their steps unsteady, dripping with moisture and gasping for air. Marigold twisted in his embrace, poised to voice her objections. Before she had the chance to speak, Silas seized her shoulders firmly. "You can't save everything on your own," he said, his tone resolute yet gentle. "Not at the expense of your own well-being." Marigold's breath caught, the flame in her gaze wavering for an instant. She let out a breath. At last she gave a nod. They lingered for a moment, droplets cascading from their hair, their garments adhering to their bodies. The tempest swirled fiercely around them, yet for a fleeting instant, it seemed as though they were enveloped in its calm center, just the two of them, ensnared in a mystery neither could quite grasp. Then, just as abruptly as it had started, the storm began to fade away. As they returned to the farmhouse, Finn awaited them on the porch, enveloped in a blanket, with Rusty nestled against his side. "Is everyone all right?" he inquired, his gaze filled with concern. Silas tousled his son's hair playfully. "Absolutely, my friend. Just a tad damp." Marigold offered Finn a gentle smile. "A warm drink can solve just about anything." The house lay in silence, interrupted only by the sporadic drip of water from their drenched garments onto the wooden floor. Marigold vanished for a brief moment, only to reappear with 2 towels, silently offering one to Silas. While drying her hair, she cast a fleeting look out the window at the fields shrouded in stormy shadows. "You were right," she whispered. "I cannot tackle this by myself." Silas gazed at her, a sense of calm washing over him. "There's no obligation to do so." A silence lingered between them, weighty yet not unpleasant, a fresh form of comprehension. Beyond, the final traces of the tempest slipped away, and in its aftermath, a new presence began to emerge. The tempest had moved on, yet the scars lingered. Silas positioned himself by the north fence at dawn, hands resting on his hips, as he took in the remnants of the chaos that had unfolded. The wooden posts were shattered and strewn about, the wire fencing ripped away and twisted like abandoned yarn. Fortunately, the cattle had been securely housed in the barn. Yet, in the absence of repairs, their containment would be fleeting. Marigold drew near, cradling 2 mugs of steaming coffee in her hands. Without a word, she offered one to him. With her gaze locked on the dilapidated fence, Silas savored a sip, feeling the warmth contrast with the crisp morning air, a situation not as dire as it might have been. Marigold emitted a soft chuckle, though it carried no trace of amusement. "That's certainly a perspective to consider." Silas cast a fleeting look in her direction. She appeared utterly drained, with shadows beneath her eyes revealing a night devoid of rest. He understood the reason. The storm wasn't the only thing that had her tossing and turning through the night. It encompassed all that one could desire. Damon Caldwell, the earth, the burden of it all, bearing heavily upon her shoulders. "It seems you were awake all night, weren't you?" he inquired. Marigold let out a sigh, massaging the nape of her neck. "Not a great deal." Silas paused, then asked, "Care to share what Caldwell has on you?" Marigold felt a surge of tension, yet she stood her ground. Instead, she remained silent for a prolonged moment, gazing out over the fields, as though seeking an answer among the undulating hills. At last, her voice emerged. "Years ago, my father struck a deal with Caldwell, long before he passed away." Silas scowled. "What type of arrangement?" Marigold clenched her coffee mug with determination. "An unfortunate choice." She faced him, her expression a mystery. "My father had great aspirations. He envisioned growing the farm, transforming it into something beyond a simple family-run venture. Caldwell served as his partner in investments. He directed funds towards my father's ambitions. However, when my father fell ill, everything began to fall apart. The debts have finally caught up." Caldwell seized the opportunity. Silas's jaw clenched. "Allow me to make a prediction. Now he believes he has a right to the land." Marigold gave a slight nod. "From a legal standpoint, he lacks a valid claim. Yet, he understands the art of exerting influence. He has managed to persuade several of our former suppliers to cease their collaboration with me. He has ensured that bank loans will not be approved. He's attempting to manipulate my choices." Silas let out a quick breath, his head shaking in disbelief. "Rascal." Marigold's lips curled in a subtle, knowing smile. "That's one way to describe him." Silas observed her intently. She had been shouldering this burden in solitude, struggling to grasp something that had been eluding her since the day her father left this world. She was determined to persevere. Such a battle. It transformed an individual, toughened them, yet it also fortified their resilience. Silas understood it deeply, for he had experienced it firsthand. "We will find a solution," he stated, his tone unwavering. Marigold gazed at him, her eyes probing his features for a hint of understanding. "What makes this matter to you?" Silas embraced her. "Observe. Having experienced the pain of losing something significant, I understand the depth of that feeling. And I understand the feeling of being alone when it all unfolds." A moment of stillness lingered between them, weighty yet not unpleasant. At last, Marigold gave a nod of agreement. The morning was dedicated to the task of repairing the fence, as they replaced broken posts and carefully rest-wrung the wire. The task was laborious and painstaking, yet neither of them expressed dissatisfaction. The manual work provided a refreshing diversion. After breakfast, Finn eagerly joined them, ready to lend a hand, though he primarily found himself chasing after Rusty to prevent any mischief. The dog had taken to the amusing practice of swiping tools and strutting them about the field, much to Finn's amusement. By midday, the most significant repairs had been completed. Marigold brushed the perspiration from her forehead, letting out a deep sigh. "That's an initial step." Silas brushed the dust from his hands. "The next step involves determining how to prevent Caldwell from advancing any further." Marigold let out a breath, leaning against the freshly mended fence. "I'm at a loss for how to put an end to this. He wields influence, possesses wealth, and has connections." Silas pondered her words. Suddenly, a concept began to take shape. "Do you still have friends in this town?" he inquired. Marigold paused for a moment, then gave a slight nod. "Several." Silas folded his arms across his chest. "In that case, let's proceed with that. Let's show this town the true significance of Everhart Farm. If Caldwell is attempting to coerce you into selling, the most effective way to resist is to ensure the community is aware of what's at risk." Marigold scowled. "So what's our approach to achieving that?" Silas wore a sly grin. "The farm becomes indispensable to them. When individuals find a cause to support, Caldwell's influence diminishes." She observed him, contemplative. "You think that'll work?" Silas shrugged. "I believe it's preferable to remain active rather than inactive." At last, a glimmer of hope danced in Marigold's expression, breaking through the monotony of the day. As the day drew to a close, Marigold caught Silas off guard with an unexpected surprise. She had prepared a meal. A complete meal, not merely a snack. Succulent roast chicken, creamy mashed potatoes, and warm, fluffy biscuits. The warmth enveloped me, rich and comforting, with an aroma that stirred echoes of the past. Silas's eyes widened as she placed the plates on the table. Marigold smirked, clearly taken by surprise. "I thought you should have something for your patience with me today." Finn is already getting involved as well. His plate murmured amidst a mouthful of food. "Miss Marigold, you ought to whip up dinner for us every evening." Silas chuckled. "Finn?" Marigold merely shook her head, a smile gracing her lips. For a time, they dined amidst a flow of relaxed dialogue. It was pleasant and cozy. As the evening unfolded, Silas observed Marigold in serene intervals, when she beamed at Finn, when her gaze drifted to the window, when she absent-mindedly tucked a stray lock of hair behind her ear, and he came to a realization. This had transcended the mere issue of territory. Another presence had begun to grow. It was an unexpected turn for both of them, and perhaps, just perhaps, it was something worth striving for as well. The days after the storm unfolded in a haze of tasks, strategizing, and still moments that seemed to stretch on indefinitely. The farm, once a solitary realm that carried the burden of Marigold Everhart's resolve alone, had started to seem transformed, more vibrant, and alive. Silas Calloway had established himself as a constant figure. Every day, he dedicated himself to mending fences, inspecting the barn's foundation, and, unprompted, assisting Marigold in addressing the escalating issue with Damon Caldwell. Disruption. He was crafting something far beyond mere wood and nails. He was bolstering something that had been deteriorating long before the tempest, and Marigold, in spite of her resolute autonomy, was starting to understand just how much she required his presence. The focus extended beyond mere tasks. It was about his perception of the farm mirroring hers, not merely as land, but as something valuable to cherish, something deserving of a struggle. Silas's concept had blossomed more quickly than they had anticipated. News traveled swiftly through the town regarding Caldwell's efforts to oust Marigold, and curiosity was starting to peak among the residents. The Everhart farm had been woven into the fabric of Hopewell for generations. Families that had once toiled on the land, who had purchased produce from Marigold's father, who had participated in summer festivals amidst the fields, abruptly recognized the gravity of the situation. Marigold found herself receiving assistance, despite never having sought it out. Gradually, individuals began to arrive. Longtime friends, familiar neighbors, and even those who had kept their distance since her father's death. Some contributed supplies, others provided their efforts, and a few, such as Mrs. Thompson, the finest baker in town, merely visited to reassure Marigold that she had support. Silas observed Marigold as she grappled with everything unfolding around her, standing at the heart of her land while others toiled nearby, strengthening fences, removing debris, and ensuring the farm appeared more vibrant than it had in years. She felt a rush of emotions, yet it was a refreshing change after a prolonged period. It wasn't due to a sense of being outnumbered. She realized she was no longer alone in her struggle. As dusk settled in, and the final volunteer departed, Marigold found herself on the farmhouse porch, where a gentle breeze stirred the leaves around her. Silas stepped in, offering her a glass of sweet tea. She accepted it in silence, her gaze fixed on the fields that extended past the fence line. They arrived, she whispered, more to herself than to him. Silas gave a slight nod. Indeed, they did. She let out a slow breath, then shifted her gaze to him. Why, he scowled. What do you mean? What makes you so invested in this location? What can I share about myself? Silas inclined his body, placing his forearms on his knees. He paused before responding, selecting his words with great precision. He confessed that he had been adrift for quite some time. I've always moved on quickly, never finding a reason to linger. Marigold observed him intently, poised in anticipation. Yet, he cast a look toward the barn, the house, the land that had begun to occupy a special place in his heart. Distinct areas. Marigold took a deep breath. In what way is it different? Silas locked eyes with her. Perhaps it's something I hesitate to part with. An unspoken gap lingered between them, laden with unexpressed thoughts and emotions they couldn't articulate. Then, gently, Marigold whispered, I don't want you to go either. The utterance was soft, yet it struck with the force of a storm. Silas felt a constriction in his chest. In that moment, countless words danced on the tip of his tongue, myriad responses waiting to be unleashed. Yet, he simply extended his hand, his fingers grazing hers softly, exploring the distance that lay between them. Marigold remained close, and for the moment that was sufficient. As dawn broke, the serene stillness of the farm was abruptly interrupted by the arrival of a sleek black car, its shiny surface starkly clashing with the dust and grime of the surrounding landscape. Silas tensed as Damon Caldwell emerged, meticulously adjusting the cuffs of his luxurious suit with an aura of assured elegance. Marigold stood beside Silas, her expression measured. Blank, Caldwell's smile was present, yet it lacked any trace of warmth. You've certainly had your hands full, Marigold, she said, crossing her arms. If you're here to persuade me to sell again, you're not going to succeed. Caldwell's eyes drifted towards Silas, observing him with a subtle intensity. I notice you've created some new, familiar faces. Silas remained unresponsive. He maintained the man's gaze, unwavering and resolute. Caldwell let out a weary breath. Listen, Marigold, I hope we can keep this civil. I have exercised patience. Yet we are both aware that this farm poses a significant risk. Time is slipping away, and choices are dwindling. Marigold's jaw clenched. We'll find out soon enough. Caldwell let out a soft hiss of disapproval, shaking his head in disbelief. You've consistently shown a challenging nature, reminiscent of your father. Silas moved ahead before he could rein himself in. It would be best for you to go. Caldwell's expression grew somber, yet a smile crept onto his lips. You must be the one who fixes things. Silas remained unmoved by the lure. I'm asking you to go. For a brief instant, Caldwell appeared as though he might delve deeper, yet he exhaled slowly, retreating toward his vehicle. Do as you please, he remarked. But don't claim I didn't give you a heads up. And just like that, he vanished. As the car vanished from sight, Marigold exhaled a trembling breath. Silas shifted his gaze towards her. How are you doing? She paused for a moment, then firmly shook her head. No, Silas breathed out. You're aware that he hasn't finished, correct? Marigold gave a slight nod. Indeed, I'm aware. Silas observed her intently and then remarked, We must prepare ourselves for whatever lies ahead. She gazed at him, her expression a mystery that defied interpretation. At last she gave a nod. They were united in this endeavor now, and there was no way to retreat. The Everhart farm stirred to life in the early hours, just before the sun began to rise. Marigold had hardly found rest, her thoughts spiraling endlessly around the dialogue with Damon Caldwell from the previous day. His presence hung in the air, thick and inescapable, like a storm cloud poised to unleash its fury upon the land. She had always understood that this battle was far from finished, yet for the first time, she found herself not standing alone. From the vantage of the kitchen window, she observed Silas already outside, inspecting the freshly fortified fences. He had lingered into the night, ensuring that every vulnerable point was reinforced, every entryway locked down tight. She did not request that of him. He went ahead and did it regardless. And that, above all else, was what disturbed her the most. As Silas Calloway integrated himself into this environment, the thought of him departing became increasingly difficult to fathom, and that filled her with dread. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, Marigold spotted Silas by the barn, securing the final bolts on the mended gate. It seems you've taken to the routine of working before breakfast, she remarked, resting against the fence. Silas wore a sly grin. It seems I have a reason to rise each morning. She rolled her eyes, yet the warmth in his voice nestled comfortably within her chest. Then, as if recalling the burden of truth, she stated, I don't. Do you happen to possess any extraordinary remedies for handling Caldwell? Silas placed his wrench aside, cleaning his hands with a rag. Not magic, just planning. Marigold crossed her arms. I'm all ears. Silas rested against the fence next to her. Caldwell is attempting to turn this into a personal matter. He aims to make you feel alone, overwhelmed, Marigold breathed out. And it's effective. Silas gave a slight shake of his head. Not any longer. Support is surrounding you at this moment, and by demonstrating that this farm is vital to the community, we can complicate his efforts to push you out. Marigold scowled. We've successfully gathered support. What else can we explore? Silas's gaze remained unwavering. Let's formalize it. Transform this space into something grander than merely a farm. Marigold raised an eyebrow. So, you're proposing that I start a theme park? Silas wore a sly grin. Not quite, but you possess land and resources. What if we begin organizing a weekly market? Reach out to nearby vendors. Transform this into a communal area. Should the town regard this farm as a valuable resource, Caldwell's influence diminishes. Marigold gazed at him, taken aback by the depth of his contemplation. For years, she felt as though she was waging this war in solitude. Here was a man who not only stood beside her but also began to envision the future, mapping out a path ahead. And that frightened her more than Caldwell ever could, for hope was perilous. Hope signified a willingness to embrace the chance that circumstances could improve, that she might retain what was dear to her, and that, if she let her guard down, she could find herself surrendering her heart to this man before she even noticed its absence. Just as Marigold was about to reply, the unmistakable noise of tires crunching on gravel broke the silence. A truck arrived, stirring up a gentle plume of dust. Henry Logan emerged, lifting his hat as he drew near. He acknowledged Marigold with a subtle nod. Silas. Silas acknowledged the nod, yet Marigold's caution had already set in. Henry had consistently maintained a position of neutrality, standing out as one of the rare substantial landowners in town who had not aligned himself with Caldwell or with her. If he were present, it certainly wasn't for a friendly visit. "How may I assist you today, Henry?" Marigold inquired. Henry let out a breath, adjusting his hat between his fingers. I approached to discuss Caldwell, and Marigold tensed up. "If you've come to persuade me to sell," Henry raised a hand. "I'm not saying I am, but trust me, he's definitely making moves." Those who remain silent. He has been engaging with the county board, suggesting development initiatives that necessitate the use of underutilized land. Silas scowled. "What does it signify?" Henry regarded them both, his demeanor somber. "So, if he can't purchase it from you, he's going to attempt to acquire the land via eminent domain." Marigold experienced a sudden jolt in her stomach. Compulsory acquisition of private property for public use. The legal gap that permitted the government to take private property for public purposes. If Caldwell could persuade the county that his proposals served the town's best interest, he wouldn't. Her consent is necessary. Otherwise, she might be compelled to leave. Her hands tightened at her sides. "That scoundrel." Silas interrupted before she could complete her thought. "What is our schedule?" Henry let out a deep breath. "Nothing has been submitted so far, but with the right allies, it won't be long before things start moving. Perhaps a couple of weeks." Marigold's heart raced with intensity. For years, she had battled fiercely to preserve this land. Now she may end up losing it regardless. Silas, on the other hand, was contemplating the future. What would be required to put an end to it? Henry observed him, then turned his gaze to Marigold. Resistance from the community. Evidence that this land is being fully utilized. Demonstrating the farm's significance to Hopewell could potentially allow you to prevent it. Marigold let out a breath. She pressed her hand sharply to her forehead. It was a challenge, neither straightforward nor insurmountable, as she cast her gaze towards Silas. "Your concept for the market. It is essential that we proceed with this. Quick." Silas gave a slight nod. "Let's dive into our tasks." As the night deepened and Finn settled into his slumber, enveloping the house in a serene stillness, Marigold discovered Silas on the porch, gazing into the shadowy expanse of the fields. She moved next to him, her arms folded across her chest. "In the face of the evening chill, this scheme of yours, are you genuinely convinced that it will be successful?" she inquired. Silas cast a fleeting look in her direction. "I believe it's worth a shot." She examined him closely, probing his expression for a clue. Uncertainty, uncertainty, everything. Yet what she discovered was a profound sense of assurance. "You never explained your reason for coming to Hopewell," she remarked. Silas remained quiet for an extended period. At last he uttered his words. He spoke gently. "I lost my wife in an accident. Finn may not recall, but I certainly do. For years, I wandered from one location to another, believing that if I just kept moving, I could avoid confronting the truth." Marigold experienced a sharp ache in her heart. Silas shifted his attention to her, his eyes unwavering. "At this moment, after what feels like ages, I find myself without the urge to escape." Marigold took a deep breath. "Is it due to the farm?" Silas hesitated before responding. Then softly, "Due to your influence." Her breath hitched. She had devoted so much time to battling for this land, never imagining that someone would stand up for her as well. And yet, there he stood, beside her, making the choice to remain. At a loss for words, she chose silence instead. Instead, she extended her hand, with a sense of hesitation and caution, and grasped his. Silas held her fingers softly, conveying a silent promise that whatever lay ahead, they would confront it side by side. For the first time in years, Marigold Everhart allowed herself to entertain the thought that perhaps, just perhaps, she no longer needed to shoulder this battle by herself. The morning air was heavy with intent. Marigold Everhart had devoted countless years to the monotony of her daily routine, cultivating the earth, sustaining the farm's viability, waging wars that remained unseen by others. However, today stood apart. Today she had allies by her side. The film industry had come together in support of her. Following Henry Logan's caution, Silas acted swiftly. He had dedicated the last few days to reaching out, engaging with local entrepreneurs, and sharing the message. The Everhart farm was more than mere soil and crops. It formed a significant chapter in the narrative of Hopewell, a haven that has nourished countless generations, a space that was as much a part of the town as it was of Marigold. The residents of Hopewell were expressing that clearly. By midday, the Everhart farm had undergone a remarkable transformation. In the expansive fields, tents and stalls were arranged with care. Producers and craftspeople showcased their wares. Vibrant fruits and vegetables, artisan creations. The aroma of cinnamon and honey wafted through the air, emanating from freshly baked treats. Families came, bringing their little ones along. The laughter echoed across the farm, a sweet and harmonious tune. Marigold had been waiting in silence for what felt like an eternity. This was more than merely a market. It was an assertion, a proclamation that this territory held significance, that it was fully utilized, that it would be fiercely defended. Marigold lingered by the barn, observing intently, as individuals navigated the stalls, trading goods and weaving tales. She had been so consumed by the struggle to survive that she had lost sight of the farm's potential. What it used to be. A hand lightly grazed hers. She glanced over to see Silas standing next to her. His expression was a mystery, yet inviting. "It was due to you," she whispered, absorbing the scene laid out before her. Silas gave a slight shake of his head. "Your actions have led to this outcome. A motivation was essential for the struggle to preserve this land. You provided them with one." Marigold forced herself to swallow, battling the constriction in her throat. "I nearly lost my composure." Silas locked eyes with her. However, that was not the case. For the first time, she permitted herself to entertain the thought that perhaps, just perhaps, she might not. However, Damon Caldwell still had more to accomplish. He made his entrance late in the afternoon, his polished black car stirring up dust as it glided into the driveway. He emerged, taking in the lively market scene with a look that blended amusement and irritation. Silas was the first to spot him. He advanced without hesitation, his posture resolute. "Defensive. You've lost," Caldwell said with a smirk. "Absolutely not. Just arrived. To appreciate the performance." Marigold approached Silas with poise, her back erect and her chin held high. "If your intention is to instill fear, you're simply wasting your efforts." Caldwell let out a weary sigh, delicately flicking away non-existent dust from his tailored suit. "Do you honestly believe this makes a difference?" He waved his hand toward the market. "Do you really believe that a handful of individuals purchasing homemade jam will hinder advancement?" Silas stepped ahead. "A united town is certainly much more resilient against external pressures." Caldwell's gaze darted in his direction, the grin firmly etched on his lips. "Seems you've truly become engaged, haven't you, craftsman?" Silas remained unperturbed. Caldwell let out a sigh, as though he were addressing a group of youngsters. "It's quite charming, indeed. However, I believe there may be a misunderstanding regarding the mechanics of this situation. I no longer require Marigold for sales purposes. The county is already paying attention. The process of eminent domain, once initiated, is unstoppable, regardless of the presence of farmers' markets." Marigold's heart raced. She was aware that he was merely pretending. He was compelled to be. Yet the assurance in his tone, so unwavering, so nonchalant, caused her stomach to churn. In an instant, Caldwell pivoted on his heel and departed. "I'll reach out," he said, glancing back. He drove off, a palpable tension lingering behind him. Once Caldwell had left, Marigold exhaled deeply, her hand moving to her face in a weary gesture. "He's not telling the truth," Silas asserted beside her, his tone resolute. "He must be," Marigold breathed out unsteadily. "But what if he isn't?" Silas faced her, his gaze firm and resolute. Then we strive with greater intensity. Marigold examined his expression, discovering only unwavering confidence within. She had dedicated so much time to her preparation. For the most unfortunate, in the face of loss, for the certainty that this farm, this sanctuary, would be stripped away from her. However, Silas held a conviction that diverged from the norm. For once, she yearned to embrace that belief as well. Instinctively, she took his hand, holding it firmly. Silas's fingers wrapped around hers with unwavering certainty. Regardless of what lay ahead, they would confront it together, in unison, and that, at the very least, was a mystery that Damon Caldwell would never grasp. The sun ascended above Hopewell, casting a warm glow of gold and amber across the Everhart farm. The tempest had subsided, not merely the one that had rattled the fields, but the one that had loomed over everything Marigold had struggled to protect, and she emerged victorious. Damon Caldwell's most recent endeavor had not succeeded. The word of the town had been given. The tremendous backing from the community, the farmers' market, the strong public dissent, and the legal challenges posed by Henry Logan and other local landowners had successfully prevented the county board from allowing Caldwell to assert control over the land. The Everhart farm stood as a bastion of safety. Marigold lingered at the boundary of the fields that morning, inhaling the refreshing autumn breeze. The expanse lay ahead, robust and untouched, and for the first time in many years, she experienced a sense of tranquility. Silas moved in with a soft tread, just as he was accustomed to doing. The rhythmic thud of his boots on the ground reached her ears before she turned to find him beside her, hands tucked into his pockets, gazing at the dawn breaking in the sky. Stunning, he remarked. Marigold gave a slight nod. Indeed, it is. They lingered in quiet contemplation, absorbing the moment fully. The expansive fields, the quaint farmhouse, and the echo of Rusty barking as Finn pursued him across the yard. It belonged to them and it was firmly rooted in place. "You did it," Silas finally remarked, his tone filled with warmth. Marigold glanced in his direction. "We accomplished it." A subtle smile danced upon his lips. "It seems I've found myself officially trapped here." Marigold raised an eyebrow. "Oh, did you have intentions of departing?" Silas regarded her intently for a prolonged moment before finally shaking his head. "No, not anymore." Something in her chest constricted, not with dread, but with an undeniable conviction. She extended her hand with a touch of uncertainty initially, but soon grew more confident, clasping his hand firmly in hers. "Good," she whispered, "for I have no desire for you to." Silas's fingers gripped hers firmly, and for the first time in ages, Marigold allowed herself to lean into something beyond mere survival. She allowed herself to embrace the possibility of something greater. The ensuing weeks brimmed with joy, effort, and restoration, encompassing not only fences and barns but also the very essence of lives. The market evolved into a staple, attracting visitors from outside Hopewell and solidifying the farm's role within the community. Finn took it upon himself to assist with the chores, proudly announcing his role as the official farmhand. He shadowed Silas, absorbing knowledge on everything from repairing loose boards to caring for the animals. Rusty, always by his side, took it upon himself to guarantee that every visitor departed with at least a mark left on their garments, and Silas was present. Each day, each morning spent alongside her, each evening filled with serene moments on the porch, every step intricately intertwined in the tapestry of the life they were creating together. As the sun descended beyond the horizon one evening, Marigold let out a gentle sigh, a slow release of breath. "This place was always home," she murmured. "I just didn't recognize how lonely it had turned." Silas faced her, his eyes unwavering, filled with warmth. "You are no longer by yourself." Marigold locked eyes with him, and for the first time in years, she felt a flicker of belief. One afternoon, Finn dashed toward them, dirt streaked across his cheeks, a spark of excitement illuminating his face. "Look at the flowers," he exclaimed, tugging at Marigold's sleeve. "Would you like to take a look?" Intrigued, she trailed behind him to the plot of earth they had sown weeks earlier, where delicate green sprouts had started to emerge from the ground. Silas knelt next to Finn, gently brushing his fingers over the newly sprouted greenery. They succeeded. Finn smiled broadly. Miss Marigold remarked that one must simply have faith in what remains unseen. Marigold sensed a constriction in her throat, for it was a reality that resonated deeply, not only for the flowers but for herself, for this land, for the existence she had never imagined reclaiming. Silas lifted his hand, gently sweeping a wayward strand of hair from her face. "I believe we cultivated more than mere blossoms that day," Marigold said with a smile, gently placing her hand over his. "Indeed," she whispered, "I believe we accomplished that." As the farm embraced a fresh cadence, with the seasons on the brink of transformation, Marigold stood alongside Silas, observing the vibrant world they had tirelessly nurtured. Hopewell had bestowed upon her a myriad of experiences, trials, sorrow, and struggles she never sought, but it had also gifted her Silas. With his hand clasped in hers, she felt an unwavering certainty within her heart. Certain things deserved to be cherished, certain struggles warranted the effort, and some seeds, once sown, would flourish into a beauty beyond her wildest dreams. How do you feel about this narrative? From where are you tuning in? We invite you to share your thoughts in the comments section below. We would be delighted to receive your thoughts. If you found this video enjoyable, please take a moment to click the like button and subscribe to our channel for more uplifting tales like this one. Thank you for tuning in, and we look forward to seeing you next time.